Hello everyone, and welcome to today's expert session hosted by Digital Ventures. And we're very happy to see you here and to have Cleura with us to share their insights on this important and highly relevant topic today. And as usual, there will be time for questions and discussions at the end, so feel free to note down anything you'd like to ask along the way. And we take the questions after the presentation. And as always, the session is being recorded, so if someone from your team couldn't make it today, you will be able to share the link afterwards. And my name is Lise Bergqvist, and I work as a startup advisor at Digital Ventures. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Arman, and welcome.
Thank you very much. So happy to be invited and to be here. I'm Arman Borghem. I'm here with my colleague Carl Lindqvist. We are both at Cleura, a European cloud provider. And today's topic is innovation and compliance in the cloud. I thought I'd introduce myself briefly a bit. I'm a regulatory and compliance advisor at Cleura. Carl here is a key account manager. And my work is focused on compliance and sovereignty aspects of the cloud. And this is a topic that's become more and more relevant, especially recently, since we got a new president in the United States, one factor in all of this. So today we are going to talk about some relevant aspects of security, compliance, innovation in the cloud from our perspective. And you can feel free to jump in with questions even during the presentation, because we're going to cover a lot of different topics. We're going to have quite a high tempo, and we're not going to be able to dive deep into every single thing during the presentation, but we'll try to leave a bit of time at the end for questions, for general discussion or questions. But if there's something you think about during the presentation that I want to know a bit more about or have a question about, feel free to type in the chat or just unmute yourself and chime in right away, because otherwise you might forget later on. And yeah, it's good to talk about it while we are on the topic. So without further ado, I will start the presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Fantastic. So here is today's agenda. We're going to talk a bit about what is the cloud, because some people mean different things by it, and it can mean slightly different things. We're going to talk a bit about who we are at Cleura, and then we're going to cover various aspects that are relevant for you when you are thinking about going into the cloud, or perhaps you are already in the cloud in some way, and try to gear it towards what you should think about, partly for your own sake, your own self-interest more immediately, but also, of course, when it comes to your customers, because they are also thinking about these things. And in a way, our job at Cleura, or my role especially, we focus on trying to understand what's happening in the world, understand what new laws and regulations are coming, and to adapt our services to make it easier for our customers to be compliant and to be safe in the cloud. And our hope is that you will learn some of that today, so that you can be more competitive and successful when you go out into the cloud in relation to your customers and the people who are interested in using your services. So what is the cloud? Just very briefly, typical division of the cloud is into three categories. You have SaaS at the top, software as a service. So that's, for example, Microsoft 365 or Slack or Proton, the type of service that you use and consume as a user immediately, as a regular user every day that you use a computer or a phone, you're using an app or you're using a web app. that's most likely something delivered out of the cloud by a SaaS company. Underneath that layer, you often have a PaaS layer, platform as a service layer. And that's a technology layer that helps that SaaS application be delivered. And then in the bottom part, you have the infrastructure. So you have infrastructure as a service. And that's where you find us at Cleura, although we also have some parts that go into the PaaS layer. And companies like AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform. And that is the most basic layer of this cloud stack. So gonna go into a bit more into infrastructure as a service. So typically, I mean, or before the cloud, you would have to buy your own servers. You would have to install your own operating system and technology on them, and then your applications and so on. But with the cloud, you get self-serve, instant access to virtual machines, containers. You can scale up and down after your needs using compute power, storage, GPU power, etc. And you can automate a lot of things and work with something called infrastructure as a code, so that you can easily copy and replicate things and scale, which is what you want. As a startup, you want to start small, but you also want to be able to scale up rapidly when you gain new customers. And the cloud is the perfect use case for that. And you only pay for the resources you use. So you only pay for the exact amount of storage that you use or the compute resources that you use. Again, allowing you to scale up and down and not be locked into committing to a certain amount of storage or compute power, for example. And the cloud provider is responsible for maintaining the security of this infrastructure layer, while the customer in this case is responsible for their part of the stack, their applications. So about us, we've been doing this cloud thing for about 15 years, so we've been around for a while. We have cloud regions in Stockholm, Karlskrona, and Frankfurt, and we focus on compliance and security as our focus areas, as well as giving our customers the freedom to innovate without vendor lock-in. And that is because the cloud technology that we use is called OpenStack, and it's a technology that is free for anyone to use without paying any license fees or asking anyone for permission. And there are multiple companies providing cloud infrastructure services based on OpenStack, which means that our customers are not, if they invest in learning OpenStack as a cloud technology, they are not locked into us as a provider. They could migrate to someone else if they are not happy with our service, which in turn, of course, makes us extremely keen on keeping our customers and being attentive to their needs and maintaining high levels of service and competitive pricing and all of that. And we have customers in various sectors, especially those with high demands on regulatory needs and compliance and security. We have three main services, one called Compliant Cloud, where, as I mentioned, those customers with high compliance needs typically go there. We have one service called Public Cloud, which you can sign up to online and start testing and trying out our cloud service with. And one called Private Cloud, which is where we will build a lockdown cloud for a specific customer, and they will be the only ones using the hardware for that cloud. So they get like their own private infrastructure. So enough about us. So today I'm going to start to talk about. Sorry, did I hear someone say something?
Is there any questions so far?
It was just an open mic, I think, from someone.
Ah, okay.
Oh, thank you.
I'll go on then. So one thing that's been happening lately is, of course, the geopolitical instability and volatility that we've been seeing. When Trump was inaugurated, these people were present, representatives from major US tech companies like Amazon, Google, and OpenAI. And some of them even donated money to the inauguration. This is an example of a op-ed in one of Sweden's biggest newspapers by two lawyers who work in IT law, and they note that when businesses or authorities that accept the standard terms of U.S. cloud companies, they are in practice giving away an on-off button for parts of the Swedish public sector to the United States. And they say, they note that if these providers were to be ordered to, they could turn off their services without any real liability under these contract terms. We have seen an example of, after an executive order by Trump putting sanctions, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court lost access to his email from Microsoft. We've seen an example of Chinese organizations, a university and a genomics firm, who, with very short notice, lost access to their cloud services from a US company. The spokesperson for the Danish government's Cybersecurity Council noted that if the US wanted to, they could shut down Denmark in about an hour. And of course, there the discussions have been especially elevated because of Trump saying that he's not ruling out using force to take over Greenland. Some other examples, during Trump's first term, he targeted sanctions against Venezuela, which made Adobe make the assessment that they had to stop delivering their services to that country. We've seen how Ukraine lost access to satellite images from a satellite provider after US decisions. There's even been a discussion of whether the US can turn off the weapons we've bought from them or prevent us from using them by denying us access to support or replacement parts. And some African countries that were facing tariffs were pressured by the United States to give the green light to Elon Musk's satellite network. So we're seeing examples of decisions where the digital sovereignty of nations are being impacted through their dependency on US tech or other ways of putting pressure on countries using US technology as leverage. Here's a comment from Trump saying the EU is nastier than China, and he's saying that the US has all the cards, and this is from May, and we saw more recently how the trade negotiations between the EU and the US ended with the EU accepting 15% tariffs and virtually getting nothing back in return, which says something about the dependency and the power imbalance between the US and the EU. Here are some reactions. So in the Dutch parliament, they've called for an end to their dependence on US software companies. In Germany, their chancellor has said that maybe we should use our regulations or other ways to put pressure on US tech companies in this trade war with the United States. And in Denmark, again, so the Minister for Digitalization has been very vocal about how problematic it is that they are dependent on US cloud providers, for example, and they are actually working on an exit strategy out of American clouds because of this. Here's the German chancellor again at a summit saying that democracy is under attack in the United States in various ways. The rule of law is under attack, and he wants Europe to become more independent, not least in relation to how reliant we are on software from the United States. This is from about a month ago in Svenska Dagbladet. A democracy researcher who has been studying the process of democracy and autocracy, so the opposite, the reversal of democracy, for 15 years. And he's the head of VDEM, which is an institute that measures the level of democracy in countries across the world. And he's saying now the United States no longer qualifies as a democracy. And this level of change has been incredibly fast changing. In Sweden, we also have an example where the US Embassy sent demand letters to a number of companies saying that they have to stop their work on inclusion, and these were providers to the American Embassy, companies that delivered services and goods to the US Embassy. And one of the recipients of these letters was the City of Stockholm city planning office, and the head of the opposition in Stockholm, in the municipality, said, well, if they keep up this demand against us, they are the ones who will lose access to our to our services, where we provide heating or waste water collection or waste collection. My reflection on this is, well, if the United States answered, well, it would be a shame if the municipality lost access to its US cloud services, I wonder if he would be as cocky in his attitude. And again, this shows the level of dependency that we have. Another aspect that's been very much discussed about, especially outside of Sweden, but also a bit more lately in Sweden, is about the costs of using these US tech solutions. So this is from Germany, where they looked at the figures for the federal government's costs for Microsoft. And this is a news item from 2024. And they say that these costs have gone up by more than 250% since 2017. And the government actually first tried to hide these figures, but this parliamentarian who is in the budget section of the parliament, he insisted, and he wanted to have these figures, and finally they were publicly released. Here are figures from Danish municipalities. So a Danish media company, they got a hold of the Microsoft costs from Danish municipalities between 2018 and 2023, and collected them and made this this table, which shows that during this time, the increase in costs has been more than 70% for Danish municipalities' Microsoft expenditure. And again, their Minister of Digitalization has commented this and been highly critical. They also interviewed the head of Danish municipalities' heads of IT, and he's saying, yes, it's true, there have been some new features during these years, but it's not at the level that we can counteract these price increases by giving a higher level of service to our customers, to citizens and to other people who are reliant on our services. And this level of increase widely above the inflation rate. And if you think about it, the actual costs are probably even more significant than what we see here. The reason for that is that these municipalities, of course, also buy SaaS services from maybe Danish companies or European companies or other companies. And those SaaS companies, in turn, place their applications into Microsoft's cloud or Google Cloud or AWS. And when those SaaS companies face price increases from their cloud providers, they, of course, have to forward those price increases towards their customers, the municipalities, or they have to lower their rate of innovation or eat the price increases themselves, and make less money or have less money to invest in improving their own services. In 2023, it came out that the region of Copenhagen was facing license cost increases that were so high, and these were for basic systems from Microsoft and Adobe, not like anything super high tech or special. These price increases were so high that they were forced to lay off 150 people. So sometimes there's a discussion about, we need we need digitalization, we need modern technology in order to manage the welfare challenge we have, where fewer and fewer people are going to have to support more and more older people, for example. But when you see these developments with these price increases and even layoffs at this level, I'm wondering, isn't it the opposite? This is not sustainable. This type of dependency on these types of services is perhaps even a threat to our welfare. And we even have an example from Sweden here. So this was relatively recent. The region in the western part of Sweden, where Gothenburg is, Västra Götalandsregionen, they renewed their Microsoft contract, which had an increase of 43.5% per year. And the journalist here, they asked them, well, have you started work on replacing Microsoft? A reasonable question to me. And he said the answer is no. We don't have an explicit strategy to find replacement solutions for Microsoft, which is very, very strange to me. But it shows how, and they talk about how they're very dependent, they're very locked in, and it would probably, it's true, it would probably require a lot of work to sort of make an exit out of Microsoft for this region. What you should think about is you're perhaps more in the startup phase or perhaps even scale up phase. You're still early in your cloud journey. You don't have to become so dependent. You can make choices that do not mean that you are locking yourselves in and interconnecting different systems and locking yourself into one single company's ecosystem or technology. Another aspect that's been talked about quite a bit is surveillance. So the United States has surveillance laws that can be used to force a US cloud provider to hand out the data that it keeps. And you might have heard about US cloud providers establishing data centers in the EU and so on. But that doesn't really matter because, again, these laws like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702, FISA 702 for short, or the Cloud Act, these laws are used extraterritorially, meaning a US cloud provider, even if it has a subsidiary that's EU-based, even if it has an EU data center that it owns, the cloud provider can still be compelled to disclose data, which is a problem.
And if you haven't heard of, if you don't know about FISA 702, you probably heard the name. You might have heard the name Max Schrems.
Yes, he's a previously champion who fought a couple of cases in the EU courts. Yes. So, and here are some examples of abuse of these laws. So, for example, the NSA has been found to violate an agreement it had with its German counterpart, and it was found that they actually tried to conduct surveillance against government bodies in EU countries and even European companies. I'm going to go through these quickly. Here is another example where the NSA violated an agreement with its Danish counterpart and targeted Danish ministries and Swedish and other defense industrial companies and objects. Actually, here's an example where Microsoft's president, Brad Smith himself, published an op-ed where he talks about how the US government, this was during Trump's first term, so he's talking about both Trump then and previous administrations, both have abused these secret surveillance laws, according to Microsoft president himself. And in 2023, it was revealed that the FBI had conducted more than 278,000 unauthorized searches of a database with FISA 702 information that they had collected. So, I'm not against surveillance per se. I think surveillance is very important to combat terrorism and other very, very serious issues that exist. I think we need signals intelligence. I think it's perfectly justified in certain situations. The problem with US law is that it's very vaguely phrased, and that means that there is a risk of abuse. So the circumstances under which these laws can be used are not clear. They're not clearly defined, which is a problem in and of itself. It's also a problem in relation to EU law. So speaking of laws, we're going to touch on laws and security in the cloud. So these are some examples of both current and upcoming EU laws in the area that touches on cloud in various ways. In Sweden, we also have a law called OSL, or Offentlighets- och sekretesslagen. In English, that would be the Public Access to Information and Secrecy Act. We're going to touch on that a bit later. And Protective Security Act as well. That's a law that regulates issues that relate to Sweden's security, national security. One important law which will come into effect on January 15th, so not that long from now, is a law that implements the NIS2 directive. So this is a cybersecurity law which will come into effect, and it covers organizations that are active in certain verticals, certain types of activities. And each of these headings here has actually subheadings that describe in more detail exactly who is covered. So you need to be covered by one of those, and also have a certain size. So at least 50 employees, or a yearly turnover of at least 10 million euros typically. And this law will divide these organizations into two categories. This is the first one. These are the ones with that are the most important, and then we have these ones which are also important. I won't go into the nitty-gritty. That can be for a later time. But if you are in one of these areas, or planning to go into one of these types of activities, it's something you definitely need to look at. And even if you're maybe perhaps quite small today, you're hoping to grow, right? And you're hoping to become big. And anyone who wants to use you and become your customer will want to look at this. Or perhaps you have customers and they are covered by this. Maybe you want to deliver to an energy company, or to the public sector, or to a healthcare company, and they are covered by these rules. Then they are also under obligations. So an organization that's covered by these rules, they have to take cybersecurity related measures in a number of areas that are listed here. And when it comes to the cloud, it's probably perhaps these two, or we can mention these two now as especially significant. So business continuity, that's about actually making sure you have access to the service that you're using, that someone isn't pushing that off button and denying you access to it. And the other one is supply chain security. So if for example, if you're a healthcare region in Sweden and you want to use a SaaS company, a company that provides an internet-based or cloud-based solution, then maybe that company is Swedish. But if that company in turn relies on a cloud service provider, then this healthcare region will have to look, okay, what dependencies do we have here? Maybe they have already multiple providers that are in the supply chain dependent on the same company, or perhaps these 3 US companies that are all under the same jurisdiction. They can all be compelled to hand over data if they are forced to under US law, and they are all could be subject to executive orders that force them to turn off their services. Under NIS2, Sweden, or every country in the EU, is obligated to draft a national strategy for cybersecurity, which Sweden has done. And in Sweden's cybersecurity strategy, they note that the geopolitical situation has deteriorated. They talk about exactly what we've been mentioning here before, that organizations become vulnerable if they don't consider their dependency on external IT services. And especially if there's a lack of alternatives, and it's even more severe risk if many organizations are dependent on the same services. Again, here you need to look at not just the immediate service that you use, but who are they in turn dependent on? Which cloud providers are they in turn dependent on? And if there is an oligopoly or monopoly situation, then options are even more reduced. They even talk about how dependency on services from organizations outside the EU can be inappropriate, and that this can be a vulnerability that can be used as a means of political pressure, exactly what we've seen examples of. And they even bring up in a national strategy for cybersecurity, they even bring up the risk of license fees being increased or services ceasing, because you can imagine if it's one thing. Okay, maybe you don't think it's very likely that there will be an executive order turning off Europe's access to US cloud services in one instant. I don't think so either. I think it's more likely that we will be under pressure to give something in return to avoid this consequence. So, for example, Trump might, or the next person who's president, might threaten to impose certain trade barriers or tariffs that significantly increase the prices of these services even more. What do we do then? Or like we saw with the example relatively recently where there was a trade agreement negotiated between the EU and the US, what was the result? The EU agreed to 15% tariffs and got virtually nothing in return. Again, showing the imbalance in power. Another aspect of the cloud is the agreement you enter into. These are some examples of areas that are typically covered in a cloud agreement that you enter into. And of course, these are important aspects, all of them, which makes it important that you also understand what you're agreeing to. And if the agreement is more easy to grasp, that's good. If the agreement looks like this, it's worse, right? So you want to preferably have an agreement where you understand what's part of the agreement. You can understand what it says in the agreement. The agreement doesn't change a lot or very often. And if there is a dispute, that it's governed in Sweden, and you can go to court here and resolve the dispute under Swedish law, which you probably understand better, or you have access to legal services that can help you with that more easily. Of course, if the agreement is difficult or even impossible to get a hold of, that's not good. If it's difficult to understand what it says in it, or if it's often changed, you need to keep up with changes. And if disputes are governed in the United States under the US law, that's less good, right? And there was even, I'll mention a research paper that looked at, they had asked 140 Swedish public sector organizations for their agreement for a US cloud service provider that they all used. And not a single one of them had even access to all of the contract terms applicable to their agreement. So that's the state of where we are. Some more things to think about with the agreement, especially when it comes to this unilateral ability to change the terms. So here's Adobe, which got some backlash for changing their terms, giving them access to their customers' data, and that they were allow themselves to use this to improve their services. And the person noted that he couldn't even uninstall Photoshop without agreeing to these terms. And when he tried to dispute this, talk to their support chat about it, again, he couldn't even access the support without agreeing to these new terms. Here's an example where Zoom changed their terms and said that now we want to allow ourselves to use some customer data to train our AI, which resulted in a backlash. And finally, they decided to change their terms back, or to make some amendments to them. But you should think about, especially when it comes to a cloud service you're dependent on, what if these companies had not changed their tune? You know, what if the next time they see it as commercially more valuable to use their customers' data for their own purposes instead of leaving their customers' data alone? These are profit-seeking companies with shareholders. They have a legal duty to their shareholders to make as much profit as possible. If their calculation is, we will make more money from this than any reputational damage we'll get and so on, then what do you think they will do? I briefly mentioned OSL before, the Public Access to Information and Secrecy Act. So if you are thinking of or becoming a vendor to the public sector in Sweden, the public sector is governed by this law, which says basically sets conditions for when they can disclose information to an external party and when they have to keep that information internal and keep it so to speak secret. We'll call this OSL secret information. And all Swedish public authorities handle this type of information in various contexts. So it could be a healthcare region that has sensitive medical records. It could be in the social care in a municipality. It could be in schools. It could be a contract which has business secrets from a supplier. It could be documentation of security measures in an IT system, or information related to Sweden's total defense. So a lot of various contexts where this type of information is handled by a public authority in Sweden. And if you are going to plan on handling this type of data on behalf of a public sector organization, then there are specific rules that set conditions for when that public authority is allowed to give this data to an external provider to have them process it in a cloud, for example. So that's something you need to be aware about and assess and think about how you can adapt your service, your agreement, the type of cloud you use, so that you make it easier for your customer, the public sector organization, to use you safely. There are a few different approaches to compliance. I usually talk about the defensive one, the righteous one, and the proactive and mature one. So the defensive one is kind of, you want to avoid reputational harm, you want to avoid fines, you want to be second worst in the class. What I mean by that is, if you think about, let's say, imagine you're in a group in the savannah and there's a lion coming towards you. Then you don't have to be the fastest to get away, right? You only have to be the next slowest one, because the lion will eat up the person who is the slowest. And some organizations have the same attitude to compliance. They think, at least if we're not the worst, then we will get by, because the regulatory agencies that can give us fines, they will go after the worst ones, and then we'll be safe. I don't think this is a very productive way of thinking about things, but this is how some people think about it. The next one is that you sort of look at the law very literally, and you just read it and you comply with it, and you don't think about the bigger picture. And then you have the proactive and mature one, where we at Cleura want to be, and we recommend you try to be as well, is when you look at the societal context of these laws. You think about, what is the goal of the legislator here? It's usually to provide some sort of benefit to society as a whole. For example, this new cybersecurity law, which will come into effect on 15th of January, a big purpose of that is to make society more robust against different types of cyber risks. And you can try to leverage that and use that in your marketing, and to make it a competitive advantage, to say, we are part of strengthening society. We are taking our responsibility here. I think that's a very powerful message that you can use. Okay, wrapping up soon. A few strategic questions. So you need to think about, what do you want to use the cloud for? Where are you in the stack? Are you probably, I'm guessing you will be in the SaaS layer, but then you need to think about what's below us in that case, in the stack, and who do we contract with? You need to think about who your customers are and who their end users are. If you have a company as a customer, maybe it's their employees that will use the service. Then it's their information you're actually handling. Or if you have a public sector customer, it could be members of the public whose information you will process. That's something you need to think about. You need to consider the geopolitical situation. Where are the winds blowing? Next term, maybe J.D. Vance is the president. What attitude do you think he has towards the EU? Oftentimes, these choices of cloud technology become very long-term. So you might want to pick an option which gives you peace of mind and gives your customers peace of mind. Again, with the supply chain security, which you should think about, and which your customers will definitely think about, especially if they are covered by NIS 2 or this new cybersecurity law, for example. How do you keep the value of your hard work? How do you make sure that you don't invest a lot in making a super innovative application that creates a lot of value, and then you need to pay just skyrocketing cloud bills that increase year after year after year? And how do you have a cloud contract where you can actually understand and which you can actually enforce? So to wrap up, the cloud is an extremely powerful enabler. It allows you to scale up, to use very modern technology instantly. It also means you're trusting someone else to handle your data or your customers' data. So you better be careful about who you trust. You need to think about the geopolitical situation. More and more organizations in Europe are becoming increasingly aware of our dependence, and they're calling for more digital sovereignty and want to feel safe with the cloud solutions and other technology solutions that they use. And you should think about whether, when you choose a cloud provider, are you choosing something that will make you dependent on a specific company, or something that is more vendor independent, that gives you options? Because that can be the difference between whether you are exposing yourself to risk when it comes to pricing, trade barriers, the risk of services being shut down, the risk of customers not wanting to use your service because of the cloud service provider you use in turn, and to be able to adapt and comply with new laws and regulations. Because as we've seen, there are many new laws coming, and I don't think the regulatory landscape will become easier or less complex. I think probably the opposite. So with this in mind, we advise you to, yes, use the cloud, use it wisely. And we will go to questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the upcoming AWS European Sovereignty Cloud, or whatever it's called?
Yes. As far as I can tell, it's doesn't actually solve the underlying problem for multiple reasons. I mean, when you read what they're saying, they're not even saying that, for example, that their services will be shielded from US surveillance. They don't say that their services in Europe will be shielded from an executive order that forces them to shut down. They say that doing X, Y, Z, or they have a new European board with people from Europe, or they say that they will have staff here and so on. But so what? It doesn't, as far as I can see, solve the actual problems. And if it did, if AWS actually believed that it will solve these key issues, they would absolutely have said so very, very clearly. But they don't. Another aspect of it is, so these three cloud providers, this goes for AWS, it goes for Azure, it goes for Google Cloud. Typically, when you use them, especially over time, you become more and more locked into them. So it certainly doesn't solve the problems with vendor lock-in, where you become dependent, where you have to deal with increasing prices, where they can have these opaque terms that you cannot really understand, and so on. So those are my thoughts. And I can mention Microsoft has made some similar commitments that they made, our new European digital commitments. I have an article where I went through them and addressed some key points of those part by part, because I think it's the same result there. They don't really solve the underlying problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have a question in the chat from Love.
Let me see. Okay, as a startup selling to healthcare providers, I need to understand how Swedish regions decide whether they can send patient-related data to large language models hosted on cloud services within the EU. What challenges should I expect when seeking approval to use a cloud provider compared to not using the cloud and instead hosting the LLMs directly on the customer's own servers? Well, it could be multiple aspects here. It could be GDPR related. It could be OSL related, like this OSL secret information that I talked about. So it depends a bit about what it is. But you say it's patient-related data. So likely both of those laws are applicable. And yeah, I will say even a lot of public sector organizations are not sure about what they are allowed to do, and they're still working through this and deciding what they can do. Our message here is, so sometimes it becomes like a false dichotomy where either where someone puts like a cloud and then an equal sign and then US clouds, right? They think the cloud must equal a US cloud provider. So that's one option, they think. And then the other option is hosting on-prem. Well, what we try to be is a third option, right? What we want to be is a European cloud that respects European values, European laws, that will enable you to use the cloud in a safe way. So yeah, that's I would say challenges related to both GDPR, but perhaps even more so OSL when it comes to that scenario. And like I mentioned before, there are multiple aspects that they have to sort of go through and look at when they decide whether they can use an external cloud provider for OSL secret information. So we don't have time to go through all of that today, but maybe another time.
Then it sounds like it's going to be quite a lengthy process for them to make that decision. They will not have something ready to sort of say, yes, you can do this. And that it's easier to approach them and say, hey, we can host our own solution on your own servers. And that will be a speedier outcome.
Could be. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you look at, or you talk to them, what about, I'm speaking of self-interest here, but like I mentioned before, there are competitors to us too. Like, what about a European or a cloud provider? What about someone who is not American? What would you think about that? Maybe that would solve the problem. Ask them, what are their actual requirements? What do they need to, what are the pain points? And see whether you can address them. Because on-prem, sure, but it doesn't give you that scalability, right? Or you can do a hybrid one. Maybe certain data should stay on-prem, and for other data, they can go into the cloud and use a European provider, for example. Okay, we have a question from Daniel. How can you make sure that...
have a little bit, yes, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. If you have a special case, I can talk about that with you separately a little bit if there's a special customer you're referring to.
Okay, thank you, Carl.
How can you make sure that the open source solutions you use don't get shut down? Do you have access to the source code stored in Europe on European-owned servers? Well, so...
Good questions.
Yeah. I can talk a bit about OpenStack. So it's an open source project. Its development is governed by a foundation called the Open Infra Foundation. Cleura is a gold member of that foundation. We are represented on the board of that foundation, so we are very much active in that community and in helping that project. We contribute code to this technology and related projects that are also open source. So yes, this code is available for anyone, and no one needs to ask anyone for permission to access it or to use it, which means that you could even set up a private cloud. I mean, we build private clouds for organizations too, where they want their own OpenStack cloud on premises. Yeah, it's not something that is possible to shut down because the code is widely available.
So when you provide a solution, say with Kubernetes, then you actually have the source code on your servers.
I mean, we can get back to you on that. I'm sure we could save a copy of it on our servers. Maybe we do. Not sure exactly about that actually, but the thing is, this code is already so distributed. It's already widely dispersed amongst many different organizations. So yeah, we have.
It would be great to have a little bit more insight on it.
Sure.
Just like I mean, version control. How do you do version control when it's so widely distributed? And so on and so forth. Just some more meat on the bones there for a non-techie. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know in detail exactly how that works, but I'm sure we can take a look at it and get back to you.
Thanks.
Yeah. We have you mentioned the Kubernetes. We have sort of half managed service there called Gardener, where we enable you to use container orchestration. It's Kubernetes, and we will keep the tech bit updated for you and manage that, and you manage your clusters, which is a pretty neat solution that works pretty well, and it's all open source that too.
What we also have is that you can POC smaller and deploy a smaller environment, like for 3 or 4 nodes or something, that you can test it for yourself. It's called OpenStack All-in-One, and if you're not that familiar with the OpenStack, we can also help you a little bit there. And if you're interested in OpenStack and open source more, we also have, if you want to deep dive deeper, we have a department called Cleura Cloud Academy.
Yes, we have a department that makes courses in OpenStack and related technologies that you can go online, and they're pretty advanced. You actually do exercises in the cloud in the courses. We have tutorials that are free and some are paid.
Good. Another related question is, when we work with public sector, they will have requirements on like ISO certifications.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. And then of course we need to rely on our vendors. And we of course need to set up a structure as well. Do you have some type of collaboration in that area where we can a little bit lean on you and your ISO or ITIL processes?
We are certified under ISO 27001, and it's the latest version of that standard as well, the 2022 version. So typically you have like the division of responsibility, right? We are responsible for the infrastructure part. You're responsible for your application. Sometimes there might be a demand from your customer that says you need to implement something perhaps that goes down into our part of the stack. In those cases, we are happy to discuss and see, okay, maybe we need to support a certain type of backup schedule or encryption or something, or a process how we handle incidents or something else. And that's also something that differentiates us from the US cloud providers, I would say, because we are happy to discuss these things and negotiate them and put them in the contract if a customer has those needs. So we're more flexible on that rather than having like a one size fits all agreement that's take it or leave it.
Yeah, like if we were using Azure, we're not going to write the data privacy agreement with Microsoft, but could that be done with you if a region would demand that? Like you have a biträdesavtal?
Yeah, of course. We have such agreements with all of our customers.
Good.
I mean, we have our standard one, and if there's something that your customer, for example, has thoughts about or has certain needs, then we're happy to discuss those too.
Perfect. Thanks.